What's up, guys? I wanted to take a second to show you my dual Nebuloch Tectonic Slam Chieftain. This build is not really super revolutionary, but it overall ended up being a really solid, really cheap character to start the league out with. And though we're like 3 months into the league, I think that could be a good league start for next league, which is why I'm putting out this video now. So the premise behind this build is basically to use the Nebuloch unique mace. That is a drop off of the Guardians, and this gives you a lot of scaling in defense and damage per endurance charge. So the idea is to get 2 of them so that those bonuses double up, and then stack as many endurance charges as you possibly can. Couple that with Chieftain, get a lot of damage, get a lot of defense, and just kind of roll through content on a budget. So for this video, that's pretty much the summary. I'm going to start by going over the passive tree, going over the ascendancy, links, gear, and then I'm going to finish off with a map. So if you get the idea, you just want to see the gameplay, go ahead and skip forward now. But let's start off with the passive tree. So the general idea for this passive tree is going to be straightforward. You're going to be looking at getting elemental damage, elemental penetration, life, endurance charges, and a little bit of armor scaling if you can. So like most Marauder builds, we're going to come down through the life regen, up through Heart of the Warrior, Born to Fight, and Strong Arm. That's a lot of extra damage, and you don't really have to spend many points to path through here, so I think it's overall worth it. Come through Barbarism to get 1% max fire res. This is not relevant for me right now as I have a lore weave, but again, this is kind of a league start character, so 1% max fire res is going to be important. Because one of the big downsides of Nebuloch is that very last line that you take 200 fire damage per second per endurance charge if you've been hit recently. It's actually pretty sizable degen, and getting % maximum fire resistance will help you counteract that, similar to how you would on a Righteous Fire character. So out of that, come into this mace cluster. There's lots of damage here. I do get Resolute Technique. This is a full conversion build, so it's 100% fire damage. So you could make an argument for getting Elemental Overload and just getting some accuracy, but again, because this was my league start character, I didn't want to have to mess with accuracy, and there was also some kind of weird stuff with the melee changes that made it feel like you weren't hitting when you should hit, so I went with Resolute Technique just to have the consistency, and I think that that makes the build clear faster and just feel a lot better. After that, it's kind of your choice. I would recommend going north up into Templar. And there's lots of good damage here. There's 5% penetration between these 2 nodes going up to Divine Judgment. A little bit of conversion, but actually this is not conversion for us. It's just a little bit of extra physical added as fire. Not huge nodes, but they give us a fair amount of damage. You can see I have an empty jewel socket at level 89, 2 months into the league, which is kind of embarrassing, but you know, that's how it goes. Up through Devotion, Holy Domination, Divine Fervor, again, lots and lots of damage here, a little bit of penetration. Discipline and Training is one of the best life nodes on the tree. Retribution and Sanctity for a little bit of life regen. You can spec this area cluster, and I would recommend that you do that initially. The only reason that I don't have it spec'd right now is because as we go down south into the Duelist, you know, coming through picking up life, picking up Unwavering Stance, there's these new clusters, and once you really get your endurance charges going, you get a lot of area from this last node, Disciple of the Unyielding, which gives you not only a minimum endurance charge, which is kind of nice, but it gives you that actually rather, sorry, it's this node right before it. It gives you 3% area of effect per endurance charge, which I have 9. So that's 27% increased area. It's the same amount, if not a little bit more area than the cluster by the Templar. But it gives us a few extra perks. It gives us a little bit more life regen. It gives us some increased damage. And then, you know, stun duration, I guess, doesn't matter. But this build actually does stun quite a bit, which is pretty convenient. Other than that, so Lava Lash is a huge damage boost because 8% Fire Pen is a lot of Fire Pen. So you'll notice we're getting quite a bit of penetration on the tree, which is nice. Ribcage Crusher. Well, I've never actually read that name. Ribcage Crusher is also good because of attack speed. That's another thing with this build, is you're going to want to get as much attack speed as you can to make it feel good. I mean, the base attack speed on Nebuloch is 1.4 with no modifier, and it can feel kind of sluggish. So definitely getting the attack speed on the tree. That's one of the reasons I come up into the actual duelist starting area, is because Art of the Gladiator is a ton of attack speed. You get a little bit of attack speed coming through Dervish, and then also up to these life nodes is just, again, a small amount of attack speed. Initially, I leveled with Blood Magic, but I would definitely not recommend that because there's so many awesome auras that you're going to be losing out on. It works, you know, when your character doesn't need to be that good. But once you start getting to maps, it is much better to drop Blood Magic and just deal with the extra points to path over and get this one node so that you can get Mana Leech, because you need the Mana Leech to sustain, which is why I was using Blood Magic in the first place. But it's totally not worth using. Don't use Blood Magic. Just get this Mana Leech so you can run some auras. So that's pretty much the passive tree. The Ascendancy is Chieftain. This build could work on a lot of different Ascendancies, but the reason I chose Chieftain is because, well, they have really worked for full conversion fire builds. So specifically this Namahu Flames Advanced node got reworked, and it converts 50% of our physical damage to fire, and then Tectonic Slam converts 60%, which is nice, and then Nebuloch adds up to 40% of our physical as fire. So basically that allows us to just do pure fire damage, which makes scaling easier, because then when we get increased physical percent and increased elemental percent, those are scaling our damage like 100%. They're not scaling like half of our damage or something like that. The next, every 10 seconds gain 100% of physical damage as fire for 4 seconds it's unreliable, but I mean, it is actually technically a really big DPS boost on paper, and you definitely feel the difference when it's up. Hinakora, Death's Fury. So I'll do these in the order I got them. First, I got Namahu Flames Advance, and then I decided to come up here for Veloko Storm's Embrace, and the reason is because around level, let's see, without the... Right, so around level 68 is when you're going to start using these maces, and you're going to have to deal with that crazy degen penalty. And so in order to do that, you really need to work your way up here for the 0.5% of maximum life regen per endurance charge, and pair that with getting 2 Combs Way rings. These are normally used on RF characters, but they work well for this character. They give us 0.4% max life regen per endurance charge, and as well as that is 1 maximum endurance charge. So this is 2 max endurance charges and 0.8% life regen plus this 1.3% total life regen, and we're running 9 endurance charges. So it ends up being a crazy amount of life regen, which totally counteracts the degen from this, and it also allows us to get a substantial amount over the top of the cap just for sustain. It also gives us 3% more damage for each endurance charge lost recently, which is really good. Because the way Tectonic Slam works is that you have this chance to consume one of your endurance charges to create like a bigger, more powerful attack. And as you consume those, you're going to be stacking that 3% more damage buff, as well as it gives us another maximum endurance charge. On the way, you get this, Forest Strength node, which is really important for sustaining endurance charges, specifically with Tectonic Slam, because again, we're going to be consuming those. There's a 35% chance to consume them. This gives us a 35% chance to gain them every time we use the skill, because Tectonic Slam is tagged as a fire skill. And so because this gives us a 35% chance to gain endurance charge when we use a fire skill, we get them back kind of naturally. It also gives us a fair amount of damage. I mean, 5% increased physical and 5% increased fire, that's 10% damage per endurance charge. So with 9, that's 90% increased damage, which is not insignificant. And the last node that you'll get, this will be your Uber Lab, is going to be Hinakora, Death's Fury. It gives us 1% of fire damage leeches life, which is, it's not nothing. We already have the leech from that duelist wheel, but hey, more the merrier. It also, most importantly, gives us 20% chance to cover rare unique enemies in Ash, and that makes them take 20% increased fire damage. So that's a 20% more multiplier, which is really going to help your single target on bosses and Shaper and whatever you end up fighting. So that's pretty much the passive tree and the Ascendancy in a nutshell. I mean, you have some other choices. If you do manage to get a Zoph's Blood amulet, which is the one that, it gives you Avatar of Fire, then that would take care of the conversion to fire, and you actually wouldn't need this Flames Advanced node. And that frees you up to do a lot of different stuff with your Ascendancy if you want to. There's a good argument, I think, for this Moon's Presence node right here. It makes enemies near your totems take 16% increased fire damage and also deal 8% less damage, which is considerable, and on paper might actually be more damage than we get from Flame's Advance. Other than that, I also really wanted Sun's Light because it gives you that 15% fire penetration, which again is really good. I mean, between all the penetration on the tree and the 15% from this node, you would be basically getting as much fire penetration as the fire penetration gem itself, which frees up a link in your 6th link, which is going to be a lot of damage. So if you do manage to get a Zoph's Blood, there's a good argument for dropping these 2 nodes and potentially getting Moon's Presence and Sun's Light. I would recommend that you just plug into the Path of Building and run the numbers yourself. When I did it, these actually were more damage. So onto the gear. This is a very simple character to gear. You're not going to do any weird stuff. So the Nebuloch Mace themselves are a clear choice. They give us the physical damage per endurance charge, the reduced elemental damage taken when hit, and a ton of armor. And I actually want to do really quickly, explain how tanky these things make us when we have all of our endurance charges. So they give us, all of these are doubled, remember, because we have 2. So that's 8% chaos resistance per endurance charge times 9. I think that's something like 71% chaos resistance right there, which means without any chaos resistance on our gear, we're already going to be pretty high up in terms of our chaos resistance. And then with just a little bit on our gear, we're going to be nearly capped, which is not very common for life-based characters. 1% reduced elemental damage taken when hit per endurance charge is really good. That's 18% reduced elemental damage taken, and that's additive with Fortify, which you should have up all the time. And so that means that you're going to be taking, nearly like almost 40% less elemental damage taken when hit, which is a crazy amount of elemental mitigation. 5 to 8 physical damage, that's a lot of damage, and it's one of the reasons that the Comb's Way ends up being worthwhile from a DPS perspective, because again, getting those extra max endurance charges adds a considerable amount of damage every extra one that we can get. And then 500 armor, so that's 1,000 armor, so it's 9,000 flat armor before scaling when we have all of our endurance charges up. And armor is really interesting. Oh yeah, so I have a little Incinerate that I use just to get endurance charges, because it's technically a fire skill. So if we spam this for a while, then you'll see that we have 24,000 armor. And people, have talked a lot about how armor is not very good, and for a long time that's been really true. But I think that the primary reason is obviously elemental damage, right? That armor doesn't do anything for elemental damage, but GG kind of like ninja buffed armor indirectly with Molten Shell, which is completely insane now when it comes to its ability to save your life if you're a high armor character. So with 24,000 armor, Val Molten Shell gives us 60% of that value as effective HP for its entire duration, which I think for me, yes, it's like 15 seconds. So it basically gives me like 14 to 15,000 health for like 15 seconds. And that health buffer is going to mitigate 80% of damage that we take from hits, including elemental damage, which was the primary downfall of armor. And on top of that, we hook that up to cast when damage taken so that it triggers the normal Molten Shell for us, and that's even like a 4,000 health buffer and mitigates, again, a lot of the elemental damage that we're taking. So Molten Shell now is insane in terms of its synergy with armor, and it completely fixes the dominant problem armor had, which was not dealing with elemental damage. And I seriously think that it's super OP right now, and hopefully they don't nerf it, but maybe they will. We'll see. So that's the Nebuloch. That's why that's important. I've already explained why the Comb's Way rings are important. Other than that, got some generic stuff. Get an amulet. This one's all right. It has a little bit of damage. You're gonna need some attributes, life resistance. This helmet is strictly good because of the last line. Nearby enemies have -9% to fire resistance. Again, very, very good. It's from Fossil Crafting if you're not familiar with how to get that mod. And this helmet actually wasn't very expensive. Shockingly, it'd be incredible for RF, but RF is not being played very much, so I got like a really good deal on this. It was like 30C or something. Belt is going to be another obvious, tons of life, as much resistance, and go ahead and get some elemental damage with attacks if you can. Spiked gloves are going to give you a good amount of damage. These are almost great, but they would be much better if they had attack speed. Again, really try and get as much attack speed as you can on your gear. And then the boots are another pretty obvious choice. Resistances, move speed, and life. And then as far as the links go, so I have Tectonic Slam linked with Melee Fizz, Elemental Damage with attacks, Elemental Focus. I use Endurance Charge on Melee Stun because it makes it easier to keep my Endurance Charges capped when I'm clearing, and it also gives 4% more damage per Endurance Charge. So with 9 Endurance Charges, that's 36% more damage. That's as good as any other support. 36% more damage is great, so you might as well just use it. And multi-strike, just to get that attack speed up. There were some problems when the league started with multi-strike feeling weird or unreliable, but I think they addressed most of those problems, and it actually feels pretty good when clearing now. I am using a 6-link Lore Weave. I did that because, it's a good chest on literally any character, but there's a lot of flexibility on the unique chest that you use. Other than that, on the helmet, we got Endurance Charge on Melee Stun, Faster Attacks, Fortify, and Leap Slam. I think this is pretty much the best links. You can probably change out Endurance Charge on Melee Stun with Blood Magic because we have that in our main link, and so you can do that just to avoid the mana cost. And then for our auras, so we got Herald of Purity, we got Flammability with Blasphemy, which is a good amount of fire resistance reduction, and then Herald of Ash. I'm not using Herald of Ash right now because I don't quite have the mana reservation for it. I'll have like 33 mana left if I use it, and that's not enough to cast my skill, so I'm still trying to figure out how to fit Herald of Ash in, but it would be a little bit of extra damage. And then we got our cast when damage taken, increased duration, we got Molten Shell and Val Molten Shell. So the way this works is interesting. The Molten Shell will trigger from the cast when damage taken, but Val Molten Shell cannot be triggered because it's a Val skill, and so we have the automated Molten Shell and then the manual trigger Val Molten Shell. They're both in one link, which is kind of convenient. I also throw my Blood Rage in there. I leveled it up, but you just trigger it manually, and then it has the increased duration. In the Mace, we got Ancestral War Chief, of course. Multiple totems is a ton of extra damage for it, and it's just kind of nice. And then Combustion, and Combustion will buff our damage because as our Ancestral War Chief ignites enemies, those enemies ignited will have minus 19% to their fire resistance. And so you'll notice, like, between the helmet, this, and the passive tree, I'm not running fire penetration in my 6-link because it's actually just not necessary. I have so much penetration from other sources. And then we got Enduring Cry, just nice to be able to manually cast that once in a while because we really rely on having those endurance charges. A level 1 Incinerate. I showed you earlier how, like, if you're going to do a boss fight and you don't have any endurance charges, you can sort of just spam this and you'll get up to your 9 endurance charges, and then you just run in there. So that's useful for like Labyrinth or Shaper or whatever you want to do. And then Blood and Sand. Blood and Sand is just area. We just use it for area. You can toggle it. You can switch between the two and get that more damage multiplier. I never really do it because I'm kind of lazy. I know, like, the toggling thing was really cool when it was first released, but I don't know, it's just not for me. So that is pretty much the items and the links, and so the only thing I think is left is just to do a quick map. So sorry, it was kind of a longer than necessary explanation, but hopefully some of those mechanics might have been new to you or somewhat interesting. I find that there's like so much to know in this game that it feels like you're constantly learning new stuff. There's nothing in this map. Oh. Except for Detonate Dead. That was terrifying. So let's see if we can. So tooltip, yeah, it's 300,000 on the tooltip. That doesn't factor in. That does not factor in penetration. So the damage is actually, it's quite good, and you guys saw none of my gear is really that incredible. The lore weave is alright, but you know, that's very attainable, I think, because it's the only expensive item that I have. It's okay on legions. I wish that I was a little faster, had a little bit more AoE. But the good news is, if you pop your Val Molten Shell, I mean, you can sort of just face tank everything. And my health didn't actually buckle too much there. Yeah, I still have a huge buffer of health. Let's see if I can track down the boss really quick, just so you that. Anyways, yeah, the clear is, it's not bad. It's not lightning fast, but it's respectable, alright? Like, you don't really feel like you're just in pain when you play this build, just desperately trying to get through the map. It kind of plays at a pretty comfortable pace, I would say. I don't even have Blood Rage on. The boss is somewhere up around here. Oh, there we go. Well, yeah, so you can see the stun is actually really good. I actually stun locked that guy. Okay, well, there were the bosses. These bosses aren't very good. This is only a tier 11 map. I've been super busy with work. I just graduated college, so I'm starting the career, and it's a little bit hectic. Oh, the ping's starting to die. Well, I haven't gotten as far in this league as I probably would have liked to, but that's alright. Alright, well, I will finish this up after I stop recording, because this recording is already pushing 24 minutes, which is, I think, about too long for a build guide. So that's the build. I think that it's overall really solid. These maces, no one uses them. They are cheap as dirt. You know, I mean, the first day of the league they'll be expensive because not many people are getting up to Red Guardians, but give it 4 days and they will be worth, you know, couple chaos apiece. Same thing with Combs Wave. They're starting, you know, our RF is not in flavor right now, which is why this helm was so cheap. So overall, I think it's a really strong, really reliable league start, and just so freaking tanky, man. Man, with the lore weave, the reduced elemental damage taken, the fortify, the crazy amount of armor, the Val Molten Shell, the ridiculous amount of life regen, you're just a meat cake, and you don't have to worry about anything, which is the best feeling, because when I tried to re-roll into a summoner for my second character this league, God, I just felt the legions so bad. I just died every single legion, and it was so frustrating. And I just went back to playing this character because I missed that tankiness. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you got something out of this. Yeah, I'll see you next league, maybe with another one.